God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Len Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. Our subtext is Let My Business Go, and we'll have guests from around the world. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. This is Brett Johnson. I'm here with Ben Patterson, and this is the Repurposing Business Podcast. Welcome to another session. Ben, it's great to have you with me.
Good to be with you as well.
Thanks so much. Where are you, Ben?
We live here in the San Francisco Bay Area on the peninsula.
Fantastic. And what is it that you do?
I'm an investor. I work in venture capital.
Fantastic. Excellent. And you've been doing this for a number of years?
Yeah, since 2011, basically.
Okay, great. Yeah. And Ben, you're also a musician and an IT guy by background in some of the things that you've done.
Yeah, I have a pretty confused resume, but I was a professional musician for a number of years and a signed recording artist with Universal Records. I ran IT for Stanford for a number of years when I wasn't touring. And then when I kind of retired from music, went back to IT for the Stanford Cancer Institute and the clinical trials division there. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, Ben, one of your claims to fame is that you've been on lockdown longer than any of us, right? So I mean, you have zero sympathy for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
You were practicing lockdown long before we even knew what that was. How did that happen?
Well, not of my own free will. Yeah. So I in December, right after Christmas, I took our kids ice skating and was 15 feet from the door to leave the ice after a couple hours of fun with them, and caught a toe pick with my skates and inverted my foot, flipped it completely around, and as I sat down on the leg, it just shattered. So I haven't left the house since December 27th for anything except medical appointments and a couple of shopping trips. So yes, I'm very, very experienced at quarantine.
So Governor Newsom should have you in his advisory panel, right?
He wouldn't want me.
Yeah, that's quite something. So, and you were in a lot of pain and on a lot of meds and everything. I mean, it wasn't pretty.
Yeah, it was a horrific break. I've got plates and screws and a year ahead of me of rehab, and I can limp around on it now enough to be able to stand and like cook dinner, but stairs are my enemy. And I mean, this is 4.5 months after, so it's going to be a long path. I think the hardest part for me wasn't even the physical pain. It was agony. It was miserable. It's the worst pain I've ever been in my entire life for a couple of months. But I think the real stress was all the plans I kind of had made for the first quarter of the year. My wife and I, in the middle of all this, were expecting baby number 4, which arrived on Valentine's Day. So my wife deserves a medal because she was caring for not just like me with a broken leg, but our 3 other kids while she was 8 months plus pregnant. And eventually we did end up getting some help in that process, but I was useless. I had all these plans for Q1. We were in the process of pushing towards a close for our next fund for our venture firm. I had meetings lined up, stacked all the way up until baby was supposed to be born, and then I was going to take some time off. And obviously none of that was going to be possible. So part of what happens when you end up on opiates for pain is the doctors now make you sign documents stating that you will enter into no legally binding agreements and make no financially material decisions while you're on those pain meds. I'm an investor. That's my job. So I could not do any work, legally speaking. And frankly, I was useless while I was on the pain meds. I couldn't remember conversations. 20 minutes after I had them, I would not remember what I just said to my wife. So I was trying to find something to do to be productive to pass the time. I really didn't leave my bedroom for the first 2 months because we have three flights of stairs in our house, and I mean, trying to navigate stairs with a broken ankle and crutches and kids' toys layered everywhere. Forget it. Didn't want to make it worse.
Yeah.
So my wife was trying to find things for me to do that would be helpful to her. So she had me open the mail and pay the bills, and half the bills were returned with unsigned checks or wrong totals. And it's like, I couldn't even do basic functional things. So, for the first couple of months, I couldn't read. My eyes actually had been going in November and December. So I had an eye appointment scheduled for the first week of January to get glasses for the first time because I was in so much pain just trying to read. My eyes would go blurry. I'd have horrible headaches, even trying to work off a computer. And then I had the accident, had to cancel all my ophthalmology appointments. So I couldn't read. And it didn't matter even if I could read because I couldn't remember anything that I read. It would just be like no way to actually follow the sequence of a book. I tried reading fiction or even listening to like podcasts.
Yeah.
And I'd listen to the stuff 2 or 3 times and I couldn't remember any of it. Sermons, anything. It was just a way to pass the time, and my mind could engage with it for a few minutes at a time, but it would be in one ear and out the other. And then I'd be depressed because I wasn't learning anything.
Wow.
Wasn't being productive. And to some extent that really just pointed out my own personal need for accomplishment and my identity being too wrapped up in being productive and what value I can add to other people, and my own need to be improving myself materially rather than just being loved by God, despite whatever value I can't add to other people or myself. So it was a hard few months in that sense. I watched a ton of movies. I think it was like 43 movies and well over half a dozen entire TV series, none of which I remember. For better or for worse, I could say that I watched them, but I couldn't tell you plot names, or plots or character names and things. So in some ways, I'm kind of grateful for the season because the pain was so bad, I wouldn't want to remember it. But also, it was forcing me to really detox from that need for accomplishment. And it's only been in the last month or so where I've been able to start doing things productively for work again, but I don't feel nearly the same identity attachment to it because I've had a few months of not being able to do any of it. Yeah. So grateful for the season in retrospect, but don't break your ankles. It's the hard way to do things.
Yeah. And the detox thing is interesting because in your case, the need to be productive, and that's almost like the Bay Area normal. It's blessed are those who hustle, or I saw a bumper sticker once that said, the meek may inherit the earth, but only what's left behind by the guys who hustle, And so it's kind of interesting. Have you seen other people having to detox from different things? Have you kind of been able to identify that with friends and other people when the lockdown then came along?
Yeah, I mean, to that extent, because I was a couple months ahead of people, they were starting to experience my path through that and their own identity issues and their own freak out. I think that's very common these days, especially here in Silicon Valley, where there is such an attachment to productivity and a need to add value, and our identities do get tied into the rat race profoundly. Yeah. I think the other thing that I did was I stopped watching the news. I was emotionally struggling so much with sort of the uncertainty around work, adding another baby to our family, my inability to actually work, period, earn an income, thinking about what do I go do here if I'm not doing venture capital, and so my anxiety and even my own self-pity had really kicked off at a big level, and so I turned off the news for the vast majority of the last few months, and that's actually been really helpful.
Yeah, so I've heard that that's a good thing to do. I mean, I'm not a big news watcher, but you can almost tell when you talk to people, those who are tracking the news and those who aren't, and then almost which stream of news they're tracking, right? Whether they're going sort of down the right or down the left. You can pick that up pretty quickly in a conversation.
Yeah, and the crazy part is, I mean, obviously mass media is super polarized along political lines, and much of what's out there is very clickbait oriented. It's half truths and mixed truths, and so I mean, I would find for myself, even when I wasn't able to remember what I was reading in the middle of the night while I'm up with pain and things, I would just open up my phone, and with one eye open because I didn't have glasses and I was getting headaches from reading, I would sit there and just doom scroll through news for hours, just trying to, I would somehow looking for more news that would alleviate my anxiety while simultaneously making myself more anxious.
Yeah.
So I do think that detoxing and letting go of the 24-hour news cycle and really limiting input from what is ultimately misaligned media. It's not there to make you better. It's not there to help you actually be more informed. It's actually there to just incentivize you to scroll below the fold one way or the other. It's really important in times like these to make sure that we're managing our own states as well as we possibly can with God, so that we don't end up reacting in fear or anxiety and begin to make decisions that are ultimately outside of alignment with what God's looking to do and accomplish in our own lives and in our communities.
Right. So Ben, 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 4 says that we're to comfort others with the comfort wherewith we've been comforted. Have you found people sort of drawn to you to say, hey Ben, like, let's talk this through? Or
yeah, in weird ways. I mean, if you look at what's happened here with the lockdown at a global level, it's a season when it feels like God is attacking every last idol on planet Earth that people have grabbed onto over the last bunch of decades.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no sports there. I mean, the escape mechanisms that we would ordinarily go towards of like, oh, I have a passion for baseball, football, basketball, hockey, Formula One. I mean, you pick it. There's no sports. I mean, the only thing that's on TV right now is I actually flipped through ESPN last night because I was looking for sports, and it's professional cornhole. I mean, yeah, it's guys standing there, 4 people in an arena, the empty arena with 2 camera guys and 2 judges just playing cornhole, and that's the only sport that's available right now.
Wow.
There's no Hollywood, there's no movies, there's no of course we have Netflix and other stuff, and people are just binge watching that frantically, but there's no new stuff, although the bigger films are being canceled. So Hollywood and the entertainment industry, if anything, seem like they're making things worse, not better, with a lot of the commentary that they're offering.
Yeah.
There's low faith in the political system for obvious reasons. There's low faith in the financial sector and the financial system. And so where everyone has either had looked to for escape, sort of an idol of escape or an idol of control, has just been floored. And so that's raising people's anxiety and depression and meaninglessness and lack of purpose here to extreme levels. And I've had, in the last few weeks, like several folks from both the VC community and just the friend network reach out and say, hey, can I jump on a Zoom call with you? I'm an extrovert and I would just love some FaceTime. And I mean, no explanation of like, what do you want to talk about? And they would call up and I mean, one guy in particular just starts dumping his guts about how he's finally having to come to grips with horrific family situations and abuse that he had as a kid, and how he has no escape mechanisms to be able to avoid it anymore, and he's just can't live with what's going on in his own head. And I've only met this guy twice, literally twice. Wow. And he's coming to me and saying like, listen, when we met and sat, you seemed like a really genuine guy, and you mentioned you had some like experience around human trafficking, and I'm sure you saw some trauma there, and I'm dealing with trauma, and like, what do you recommend? And I mean, that's now coming up on a more and more regular basis the longer that this drags on. People are coming to the ends of themselves and of their lack of coping mechanisms, and having to reach out for something beyond themselves. And hopefully we see this, God is beginning to bring people to himself through that process.
Wow. Ben, did you go through a kind of a why me stage at all with this whole thing?
Oh yeah. No, the first month was pure self-pity, and very, very difficult to wrestle through things with God. Like, just like I was 15 feet from the door to leave the ice, to go home, to have a wonderful new year with our kids, and to get ready to welcome baby number 4, and to finish executing this out and get to a place of financial stability with the company. And then everything just imploded. And I was like, God, I don't feel protected. I don't feel cared for. If anything, I feel like I just got shoved down the stairs. And it took a little while to kind of work that through and to get to a place of peace with God, and to force myself out of that self-pity into one of choosing to be grateful for what God was going to accomplish in my life in this season.
Mm. And one of the things I found is keeping a clean filter, right? So junk comes at you. I mean, it does for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not, or person of faith, you love God, you don't care about God. Stuff happens in life, and whether it goes into the for harm bucket or the for good bucket sort of depends on the filter, the view that we have of God. Is God good? Is he for me or not? Is he there for me, or did he just take a day off when you went ice skating,
Yeah.
So sounds like you've been able to get your filter clean in terms of, okay, sort that stuff out. And
Yeah. I definitely more so over the last few months. I would say in the fall, I was dealing with a lot of very heavy-duty issues in just looking at our own personal family plan around my parents aging and care for my youngest brother who has some disabilities. I had several friends that were in the process of dying from various diseases and leaving kids behind. I've had a person commit suicide in our network, like just a lot of very, very heavy stuff that I was wrestling through with God. And so to that extent, I felt like I was the faith that I was standing on was getting kicked hard on a weekly, if not daily basis, and just sort of going like, God, where is your goodness in the midst of all of these really painful situations? And so when I finally had my ankle snapped, that kind of all came crashing down on me. And the thing that I am most grateful for over the last few months has been sort of like having to have a hard reset with God on his goodness in all seasons, and having a hard reset on my filter of choosing to be grateful for all things, and allowing God to open up my eyes to what he is doing that is good despite all of the hard things that we're in the middle of.
Yeah. Do you kind of feel like in life we go through life and then we get stuff laid on us, work stuff, financial stuff, family stuff, and so on, and it becomes like a bark around the tree, and we lose touch with the core of what God's about, would you say?
Yeah, and some of that just has to do with the velocity of life these days. I mean, especially here in Silicon Valley, we don't leave ourselves margin to process. I don't. I would say the vast majority of my network is pretty similar. We process in very tiny little gaps, but much of this stuff requires intentionality that exceeds the minutes that we're willing to dedicate to it. Yeah. And filters, once they're clogged or broken, are really, really hard to rework. It takes a shock to the system at some levels to do it quickly, or it takes a lot of long-term work to undo that damage. Yeah. So I think if there's anything that it feels like I'm having to revisit here again, it's just like, where's the margin that I'm intentionally building into my life to make sure that I'm connecting with God to keep that filter clean, and so that I don't lose perspective regardless of what I'm in the middle of.
It's interesting you say that, not far from where you live. I remember my first conversation I had with a guy who had more talent than a basketball team and a lot of stuff going for him, tall, dark, and handsome kind of guy, financially doing well. And so I've mapped out areas of life, which has become for me the 10F model. And I just asked him a question on his family, his finances, his fitness, his faith, and all this kind of stuff. And I said, okay, where do you think you are? Because his issue in figuring out God's calling on his life was actually an issue of margin. And you have to make space for God if you want to do what God wants you to do. You just can't give him spare change, a little sound bites, little bits and pieces. And we've kind of squeezed God to the periphery and kind of kept him to tweets and Facebook posts and that sort of stuff. And so your time to think, to ponder. I think that's been one of the big things coming out of this crisis is people just have had a press pause, and it's had a chance. And you can't do that for a week. That needs to be long enough for the layers to come off, right?
Yeah. Well, and some of this comes down to also the spiritual streams that we're drawing from, where, I mean, I can say for myself and the way that I've kind of looked at God's intervention and the pursuit of the kingdom here on earth, that we can sometimes build ourselves a little sense that we're in a spiritual Disneyland of God is always going to intervene. He's always good. There's the access to the supernatural and his power to see his kingdom realized, not just in our own lives, but in our communities and spheres of influence. But we do a really terrible job as the body of Christ in processing pain and disappointment and the shame that comes with what we perceive to be our own personal responsibility or for those failures or the lack of success, maybe human success. And that seems to be pretty pervasive right now, at least in my personal sphere and network.
I was struck recently with looking at the whole story of Exodus, the nation of Israel coming out of Egypt and so on. And I wondered how many times those Jewish mamas and the people prayed, get us out of here, get us out of here, let us go. And eventually it gets to a point that when they actually do leave, it's 430 years to the day, the Bible says, to the day when they went in. So it's like God had a timetable. I mean, you can pray all you like. You know, you can stand on your head, you can beg, you can plead, you can negotiate like a good Jewish mama, but it was 430 years to the day, you know, and they couldn't have taken an extra day to pack. They would have missed it. And, you know, there's just some things that had to happen. In other words, God has a bigger picture going on in the world. It's not all about us. And sometimes we have to write it out just because he's got a bigger thing happening.
Yeah, I think that was some of the challenge that I was feeling when I broke my leg. Was here I was wrestling with some sort of prophetic words and things that I felt like God had been speaking to me, especially about that first quarter of the year. Yeah. And then you break your leg and you're like, what the heck? Like, come on, where's this all going? And you're absolutely right. I mean, there are certain types of sort of the moves of God or prophetic words that are just inevitable because God is going to make it happen on this timeline, and there is nothing that is going to stop that particular thing. And then there's other things where we have to kind of wrestle them into manifestation in agreement with God and what he has spoken to us. And we have free will to agree with it and to partner with him on that coming to exist.
Right.
And then there's other things that we can push on with that are more voluntary, where we're coming and appealing to God and say, God, this is where my heart is moving. And then we can appeal to him to be there. But it's very dangerous for us when we start to assume that God is going to divinely intervene on all causes based off of what we've heard without understanding and discerning which of those buckets that goes into.
Yeah. So that kind of brings to the point, did you came to a point in time in your thing when it was like, okay, Ben, now it's time to move forward. Okay, you've had enough of the, you know, I presume once the drugs had worn off and some of those mitigating things, I presume your friends have given you a free pass on any Facebook post you made or social media comment during that time.
Kind of. I hope so, but yeah. There. Actually, you know, the point where God said enough is enough happened before I broke my leg.
Okay.
And this is where I knew that my filter was broken. Was I got a message from an intercessor that I haven't talked to in years, I haven't stayed in touch with, haven't spoken with, has no context for anything that was going on personally or professionally, and sent me a message and said, God says you need to stop feeling sorry for yourself and stop acting as if you are not in his will and you're part of what he is doing here, and start taking responsibility. And that was probably 48 hours, like right before Christmas, 72 hours before I broke my leg.
Wow.
And it was right on. I mean, everything she described was exactly where my head and heart and filter were at. Mm. And I was starting to process, okay, well, great. Here in Q1, I'm going to work on that. I'm going to start working on my self-pity and processing and whatnot. And then I broke my leg and I had no choice. So, but as over the last couple of months, I mean, the first 2 months of things, I couldn't do anything. And then we had a baby and then even more useless. But in the last month, there's been a sense of God just saying, okay, now it's time to start pushing more. And once your filter is clean and you can start to hear better from God about his goodness in the midst of your circumstances, then you have a chance to be in alignment. But when you're processing outside of the context of God's goodness, out of self-pity or anxiety or fear, man, you make terrible decisions.
Yeah. So what are your top 2 or 3 things you've done to encourage yourself to kind of restart and to sort of put the pedals on your heart and give yourself a shock and get yourself going?
Yeah, I mean, now that I've got glasses and I can read again, and I'm off the opiates so I can remember stuff. I'm spending a lot more time just reading the Bible, listening to the Bible, and the washing of the word in all contexts. I'm not even trying to process everything that's happened necessarily, or the things that I'm still in the midst of trying to solve with all of these difficult situations that are around.
Yeah.
I'm just prayerfully going through Scripture and saying, God, supernaturally clean out my filter and my mind, that it would be realigned with how you think and see. First off, how you think of and see me, but then also how you see my circumstances. And I'm not going to try to hold on to what I perceive to be my right to know and understand why things are happening the way that they are. Yeah. Letting go of my attempt to control everything has been really key to that.
That's good. That's good.
A lot more time in worship. Just choosing to spend time breaking out a guitar, or just while I'm doing dishes, throwing on worship in ear pods and stuff. Yeah. Just, again, part of cleaning out that filter. Mm-hmm. And then limiting things that raise my anxiety and cause me to dive back into a fear mindset of trying to control situations, circumstances, plan for contingencies. Our family crest as Pattersons is nunquam non paratus, which is never not prepared. Mm-hmm. It's a really hard thing to, that is so ingrained in me personally. I look at everything and I start from a worst case scenario and I work my way back towards what is most probable, which is why I get overwhelmed when too many areas of my life are wrestling through those kinds of challenges. Yeah. And in this current environment where there is so much uncertainty and you can't plan for anything more than about 7 to 12 days out, we have to let go of our human ability to prepare for that stuff and to just trust God and come back to a place of faith in God's goodness and care for us as individuals, for those around us, and in confidence in his plan in the world, that he is going to bring to completion the good work that he's begun in us spiritually, but also that what he's doing in the world is a good thing.
Sounds like it's time for a ride on the family motto, never not prepared to trust God, added by by Ben in 2020,
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Shoot, I'm going to write that down after this.
Yeah, that's quite something. Well, Ben, that's amazing. And thanks for sharing honestly about your journey, because, the need to try to make neat sense of this, it's just not going to happen. And so for sharing your story and being willing to be available to others. It's interesting how people, I think, are being attracted to you because of the fact that you've been through this stuff and you're able to at least help some of them through that, which is fantastic. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens the next chapter. And, I'm the fifth of 5 kids, so I'm just saying the fifth one normally turns out the best, so don't stop there. The next one could be easier. And
I'm the first of 4, so I was the practice case where all the mistakes got made.
The test number. Yeah. Well, Ben, it's been great chatting with you. Thanks for taking the time. And
good to talk to you.
Get it? Yep. And I'm sure this is going to be very useful to folks who are watching and listening. So greatly appreciate your time.
Of course.
Thanks, Ben. Bye for now.
See you. Bye.